There are over 43 million workers that are exposed to hazardous chemicals in the workplace. OSHA statistics show about 15% of all workplace injuries and fatalities relate to chemical exposure. Physical, health, fire, and other hazards can occur on a daily basis. With over 500,000 different chemicals throughout the world, OSHA has modified the Hazard Communication Standard, HCS, by adopting provisions of the Globally Harmonized System, GHS, to assist workers with the information they need to recognize and avoid hazardous chemicals. This training module, which is one in the Betco training library, focuses on everything from the content of the HazCom standard to the Globally Harmonized System, GHS, to how to use safety data sheets, SDSs, and chemical labels to prepare for hazards or react to exposures. OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is a government agency that was founded in 1970 to ensure safe and healthy working conditions for employees. The HazCom standard achieves its purpose by an integrated four-pronged system. First, chemical manufacturers and importers must review available scientific evidence concerning the physical and health hazards of the chemicals they produce or import to determine if they are hazardous. Second, the employer must have a written hazard communication program in the workplace, and there must be someone responsible for keeping it up to date. Employees must familiarize themselves with the program and understand how it is implemented in the facility. This written HazCom program lists all of the hazardous materials at the worksite. It explains how the employer informs employees about new and existing hazards. It also notes the location of SDSs and who is responsible for updating them. Finally, it includes information about safe handling and recommended personal protective equipment, PPE. Third, for every chemical found to be hazardous, the chemical manufacturer or importer must develop comprehensive safety data sheet, SDS, and warning labels for containers and send both with the chemicals to users. The employer must maintain a current hazardous chemical inventory form, which will be located with the SDS sheets. It is a best practice to have SDS sheets for all chemicals located and used in the facility. Fourth, all employers must provide information and training to employees about the hazardous chemicals in their workplace. Proper training will ensure that all employees will know how to read and use SDSs, will know what protection is required to work safely with the chemicals in the workplace, and will be able to determine what actions to take if an emergency occurs. What is GHS? GHS is an international approach to hazard communication, providing generally accepted criteria for classification of chemical hazards and a standardized approach to label elements and safety data sheets. This system provides classification criteria for health, physical, and environmental hazards of chemicals. It also includes standardized label elements that are assigned to these hazard classes and categories and provide the appropriate signal words, pictograms, and hazard and precautionary statements to convey the hazards to users. GHS also provides a standardized 16-section safety data sheet format for all chemical products. Who is covered? Chemical producers, manufacturers, and importers will need to review the hazard information for all their chemicals produced or imported, classify them using the new criteria, and update their labels and SDSs accordingly for distribution. Employers will need to use these new labels and SDS sheets and provide updated training for all employees. Everyone that was covered previously by the OSHA HazCom standard will continue to be covered by this revised program. Hazardous materials. Many people characterize a hazardous chemical as one that could burn your skin, is flammable, could cause long-term health effects, cancer-causing, corrosive, toxic, or can damage specific body organs, which is true. However, OSHA also includes products that may cause minor irritation, like shampoos and detergents, which may cause temporary redness or itching of the skin or watery eyes as hazardous. Chemical hazard classifications. Physical hazards such as flammability or explosion, which potentially can cause serious accidents and injuries. Health hazards can affect a person's health either in the short term or in the long term. Environmental hazards can affect aquatic life in the short term or in the long term. GHS will not address environmental hazards since they are regulated by other agencies. Physical hazard classifications. Corrosive to metals, explosives, flammable aerosols, flammable gases, flammable liquids, flammable solids, gas under pressure, organic peroxides, oxidizing gases, oxidizing liquids, oxidizing solids, pyrophoric liquids, pyrophoric solids, self-heating substances, self-reactive substances, substances which on contact with water emit flammable gases. Health hazards classifications. Acute toxicity, aspiration toxicity, carcinogenicity, germ cell mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, respiratory or skin sensitization, serious eye damage, skin corrosion, irritation, target organ systemic toxicity, single exposure, target organ systemic toxicity, repeated exposure. Environmental hazards. Acute aquatic toxicity. The intrinsic property of a material to cause injury to an aquatic organism, fish, crustacean, algae, plants, in the short-term exposure. Chronic aquatic toxicity. The potential or actual properties of a material to cause adverse effects to aquatic organisms during exposures that are determined in relation to the life cycle of the organism. Labels. An essential part of a hazard communication program is labeling. This is a quick, easy way for you to see the most important information about the product you're working with, the product's name, any hazard warnings, directions for use, first aid, and the manufacturer's name and address. All Betco brand labels also include helpful telephone numbers and SDS access number for an automated fax-on-demand system. Labeling requirements include the following. Product identifier is the name or number used for a hazardous product on a label or in the SDS. Signal words will be used to emphasize hazards and indicate the relative level of severity of the hazard, assigned to a GHS hazard class and category. Only one signal word should be used on a label: danger, severe, or warning, less severe. Some lower-level hazard categories do not use signal words. Hazard statements are assigned to a hazard classifications and categories that describe the nature of the hazards of a chemical, including the degree of hazard. Appropriate statements for each GHS hazard of the product are included on each label. There are two chemical hazard classifications, physical and health hazards. Each of these classifications has specific categories such as irritant, corrosive, combustible liquid, oxidizing liquids, and others. Pictograms are symbols plus other graphic elements that are intended to convey specific information about the hazards of a chemical. They are composed of a white background and red borders with the appropriate GHS symbol. Precautionary statements are phrases that describe the recommended measures to be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to a hazardous chemical. The precautionary statements have been linked to each GHS hazard statement and type of hazard. Example, a precautionary statement of eye irritant will also include the warning to use protective eyewear. Supplemental information is information on the container of a hazardous product that is not required or specified under the GHS. Supplemental information may be used to provide further details that do not contradict or cast doubt on the validity of the standardized hazard information. Example, the label could include the color, fragrance, or VOC level of the product. Exceptions to these labeling requirements are disinfectants, pesticides, herbicides, skin sanitizer products, consumer products, alcohol products, tobacco products. Product containers of chemicals that have been poured from one container to another also require the same specific labeling. The OSHA standard states that it is not necessary to label a container that you have poured from one container to another if the entire contents will be used or disposed of during a standard shift, such as a mop bucket or spray bottle. Employers may choose to label workplace containers either with the same label that would be on the shipped containers or with label alternatives that meet the requirements for the standard. Betco provides pre-printed containers or self-stick labels for secondary labeling purposes. Employers should provide the containers, self-stick labels, or provide information on appropriate labeling. In addition to these OSHA labeling requirements, an employer may choose to add additional information such as the NFPA or HMIS ratings on container labels. Never use or handle an unlabeled container. If you find a container that is not labeled, notify your supervisor immediately. Pictograms. Another component of the GHS program is use of pictograms, which consist of a symbol on a white background framed within a red border and represents a distinct hazard or hazards. The pictogram on the label is determined by the chemical hazard classification. The HCS pictograms and hazards are health hazard, like a cancer-causing substance. Flame, a substance that is flammable. Exclamation mark, a substance that is an irritant, skin sensitizer, and others. Gas cylinder, a substance that is under pressure, like an aerosol. Corrosion, a substance that is corrosive to the skin. Exploding bomb, this normally won't have application in our industry. Flame over circle, a substance classified as an oxidizer like bleach or peroxide. Skull and crossbones, a substance that is very toxic like a drain opener. Environment, this pictogram will not be mandatory under the GHS changes. Safety Data Sheets, SDS. SDSs, previously called Material Safety Data Sheets, or MSDSs, must be provided by the chemical manufacturer, importer, or distributor with the first shipment and any time the information changes. They must be obtained for all hazardous chemicals in the workplace before they are used. It is a best practice to have SDSs available for all chemicals in the work area. Sections 12 through 15 are not mandatory, and OSHA will not be policing the content of these sections because they are outside the scope of its jurisdiction. Examples: Ecological Information and Disposal Considerations, EPA, Transport Information, DOT, and other regulatory information concerning other governmental departments. SDS requirements. Employers can provide SDSs in additional languages, but English is required. OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard requires SDSs for the chemicals used in the workplace to be readily accessible to employees. It is imperative that as an employee you know where the SDSs are located at your job site. SDSs can often be found in a binder at a HazCom station within your workplace. Many facilities are putting SDS information on computers. Betco products can be retrieved by a 24-hour fax line or at our website, www.betco.com. Be sure to take the time to read about the products you use. Think about what the sheet says and how you are using the product. And remember, if you're going to work with a new product, read the SDS and consult with your supervisor before you begin. Required sections for the SDS are Section 1. Identification includes the product identifier, the manufacturer or distributor name, address, phone number, emergency phone number, and recommended uses and restrictions for use. Section 2. Hazard or hazards identification identifies the hazards of the chemical presented on the SDS and the appropriate warning information associated with those hazards. Example: this would be the hazard statement, signal word, pictogram, and precautionary statement from the label. Section 3. Composition information includes chemical ingredients contained in the product with appropriate chemical names and chemical abstract service numbers, CAS, trade secret claims. This is only for the hazardous ingredients. Section 4. First aid measures includes important symptoms, effects, acute, delayed, immediate, and required treatment for the initial care given by untrained responders to a person that has been exposed to the chemical. Section 5. Firefighting measures that list suitable extinguishing techniques, equipment, and chemical hazards from a fire of this chemical. Example: what firefighters should wear while fighting the fire. Section 6. Accidental release measures that list emergency procedures, protective equipment, proper methods of containment, and cleanup of spills to minimize exposure to people, properties, or the environment. Example: how to neutralize the chemical and proper disposal methods. Section 7 lists precautions for safe handling and storage, including incompatibilities with other chemicals. Example: exhaust fans or temperature limitations. Section 8. Exposure Controls, Personal Protection. List OSHA's permissible exposure limits, PELs, threshold limit values, TLVs, appropriate engineering controls, exhaust fans, and personal protective equipment, PPE, to minimize workers' risks. Example: eye, face, skin, or respiratory protection. Section 9. Physical and chemical properties that list the chemical's characteristics, like pH, color, fragrance, flash point, and others. Section 10. Stability and reactivity that lists chemical stability and possibility of hazardous reactions. This will identify any materials that are not stable with other chemicals. Normally, this will be stable for typical cleaning products. Example: never mix ammonia and bleach. Section 11. Toxicological information includes routes of exposure, related symptoms, acute and chronic effects, and the numerical measures of toxicity. Example: inhalation, ingestion, skin, and eye contact. Section 12. Ecological information. EPA concerns about information to evaluate the impact if the chemical were released to the environment. Section 13. Disposal considerations. EPA concerns for proper disposal practices, recycling or reclamation of the chemical or its container, and safe handling practices. Section 14. Transport information. DOT concerns with shipping and transporting of hazardous chemicals by road, air, rail, or sea. Section 15. Regulatory information of other federal, state, or local regulations that are not indicated anywhere else on the SDS. Section 16. Other information includes the date of preparation or last revision or other labeling information like HMIS or NFPA labeling systems. Note: since other agencies regulate this information, OSHA will not be enforcing Sections 12 through 15. Training. Just having labels and SDSs around would be ineffective if you didn't know how to interpret them or where to find them. That's why proper training is a requirement for an effective HazCom program. Proper training will ensure that employees will know how to read and use material safety data sheets, will know what protection is required to work safely with the chemicals in your workplace, and will be able to determine what actions to take if an emergency occurs. Employees must be trained on the Hazard Communication Program before being assigned to work with a hazardous chemical they could be exposed to, whenever the hazard changes, whenever a new hazard is introduced into their work area. Employers must tell employees about the requirements of the Hazard Communication Standard, where hazardous chemicals are present in the workplace, what the written program, hazardous chemical inventory, and SDSs are, and where to find them. The training employees receive must include an explanation of the HAZCOM program, including information on labels, SDSs, and how to obtain and use available hazard information. The physical and health hazards of chemicals in the employees' work areas. What employees can do to protect themselves from these hazards. How to detect the presence or release of a hazardous chemical. You must check with your supervisor if you are not sure about any of this. Besides training, employers must have a written hazard communication program in the workplace, and there must be someone responsible for keeping it up to date. Familiarize yourself with the program and understand how it is implemented in your facility. This written HAZCOM program lists all of the hazardous materials at your site. It explains how your employer informs you and your coworkers about new and existing hazards. It also notes the location of SDSs for each material and who is responsible for updating them. Finally, it includes information and hazards, safe handling, and recommended personal protective equipment. Summary: HAZCOM Best Practices. You have the right to know about the chemical hazards within your workplace. There are 3 important parts to hazard communication: labeling, SDSs, and worker training. All chemical containers must be properly labeled. This includes the original manufacturer's packaging, as well as secondary packaging such as spray bottles. Be sure to read the label and SDS before starting any procedure. Know where the SDSs are located in your facility, as well as how to read and understand each SDS for the products you come in contact with, especially new ones. Always wear recommended personal protective equipment, or PPE, such as gloves and goggles. You'll find them listed on the product's label and/or safety data sheet. Read and understand your employer's HAZCOM program designed for your facility. If possible, use a chemical management system, such as Betco's Fast Draw chemical management systems, which are an effective way to reduce chemical exposure. They limit contact with concentrated chemical products and ensure accurate product dilution. Remember, you have the right to safe and healthy working conditions, and you have the right to know about any and all of the hazardous materials you work with. Be proud that you and your employer have taken the time to learn more about OSHA HAZCOM and use your knowledge to make a difference in creating a safer work environment. The information presented here provides an overview of the requirements of the Federal OSHA HAZCOM standard. Please consult your regional OSHA office or state office for more specific information applicable to your state.